One critical skill in your self-protection arsenal needs to be proper verbal training. And I can't think of anybody better to get you there than my guest today. But before we do that, go to timlarkin.com, sign up for our masterclass, get all the information to put your self-protection strategy together now. Also, please subscribe to the channel. Getting harder and harder for us to reach the audience. It's just insane. I had a discussion with some Google people the other day, and even they're having trouble telling me why we are not whitelisted. So folks, please share the channel. If you love these interviews, let people know. And now, let's get to it. Without further ado, today's guest is none other than Chris Voss. Chris, it was a really interesting story. When Chris's book first came out, Never Split the Difference, I was in Chicago at an event, and I was invited to a dinner, a roundtable type dinner. And I was randomly seated next to Chris. In fact, that picture is the night Chris and I met. Well, we became friends. He ended up moving out here to Las Vegas, and it's just been amazing to watch what's happened to him, how he's blown up. His book is just all over the place. It's one of the #1 negotiation books ever written. His tactical empathy is probably one of the most used techniques in negotiation. And he also is not only on Masterclass, which is a application that has all various subject matter experts, but he's one of their #1 people, so much so that he actually has 2 modules on Masterclass, which is just amazing. But he's a great guy, and he was able to come in. He lives in Las Vegas now, and he was able to come in and sit down with me at my lounge at the machine gun range. And we did a long interview on how to use your verbal skills. And Chris, if you don't know much about him, former FBI negotiator, just an amazing communicator in a very realistic situation. So when we talk about violence, we talk about, how to de-escalate in a way that is very practical and very interesting. He's probably one of the best communicators I've ever met. His techniques have helped me tremendously in the realm of human nature and interviewing people, and I think you're going to get so much out of this. So without further ado, Chris Voss. Chris Voss, thanks for doing this, man.
Dolph Lundgren, happy to be here.
Yeah, I know. I got the look. It's funny. Like they heard your background and in the intro and everything, and I've seen a lot of interviews with you. I obviously read your book, which you and I originally. That's how we met in Chicago, sitting down next to you. Literally after I read your book, the vast majority of what I've seen has been in not just negotiations, but more like business negotiations and more like how people are there. Yet, what I think is so fascinating is your negotiation skills were learned at probably the highest stakes, and we talk about, in this podcast, we talk a lot about, violence and precursors to violence and mistakes people make.
Right.
And what I'm learning more and more as I'm going more in depth with this and the subject matter experts I'm talking is your skill set that you teach people. I'm learning understanding human nature and understanding how to talk to humans from a de-escalation standpoint is huge, yet we're terrible at it for the most part. Most of us don't know. So can you talk to that subject, what did you learn? Like I thought it was really interesting how when you were learning how to negotiate, when they had they challenged you to work with the hotline.
Yeah.
And you thought you were doing great on that one hotline, and you learned, I was using the wrong communication skills with this person and stuff. And can you just kind of talk about that aspect of it?
Yeah, well, I've thought about that one a lot too, because what was really cool about that whole thing was, like in any perishable skill, you can get off track without knowing it, while simultaneously trying to get better. And one of the things that we've adopted in our training on negotiation recently, which cleared a lot of stuff up for me, was concept of shu, ha, and ri, which I'm sure you're familiar with. You know, it's a martial arts concept. Shu is the basics. Do the basics exactly as told. Ha is, you're still doing the basics, but you're also learning from other masters, so to speak, and you're seeing what they say that resonates with you. And then ri, you know, you're in zone. You're in flow. You're creating your own rules, but the rules are still within the discipline. And so what I realized on a hotline was, without knowing it, I was trying to get to ri, but every now and then I would get to ri and be on the wrong track. Right. And that's why you got to go back to do the routine practice and the fundamentals, because I had done a whole year on the hotline of just live interaction without doing any training in the interim year. No going back and focusing on the basics.
And you had people calling up, they were contemplating suicide or threatening to do suicide, and
or some sort of crisis. And so I thought I was at a higher level when in fact I had picked up some really bad habits that I didn't know that I had. And thank God they brought me back in for an eval, and you know, and also thank God the guy that evaluated me was just like super nice guy, so that I could hear the message. Like, I'm shocked that this guy who was so nice and so, he always joked around and he was always very supportive, was just killing me in the eval. Like, you were horrible, you stunk, that was awful. And I was like, oh, this is Jim, this is a nice dude. How is it that he must be correct? Because he's not critical otherwise. So yeah, I'd gotten off track trying to get better. And which is why now when we emphasize, I'm sure that you realize this the same way. Like, you know, you got to spend time on the fundamentals in order to increase your skill level.
Yeah. We talk about like the concept, like I grabbed from Spec Ops community, is the idea of crawl, walk, run.
Yeah. Yep.
The crawl stage is the one where you really got to put the time in. You know, because as soon as you add velocity, and for you, like, you know, negotiation velocity, you're going at the highest level. If you haven't put that time in that, and what I find is communication, it comes back to communication on everything, you know, especially when it comes to violence. There's either a lack of communication where you're dealing with a predator, you know, or there's communication and you don't realize what the other person's looking for. You immediately think you have to get aggressive to match aggression when you don't realize the human nature aspect of it is, no, this guy is having a bad day. This is a problem or something. And there's ways I can interact with people. And my goal in having you come on was, you know, just the idea, you're so good at teaching people how to recognize, you know, what to hear, what to listen for.
Right.
You know?
Well, and the other thing, on the continuum idea that you're talking about, and this might be rewinding a conversation a little bit, but, you know, violence is a decision when nonviolent behavior has failed. Now that may make no sense to people on the outside, but you know, we used to always learn when we're trying to assess somebody, you know, who's taking hostages or threatening to blow people up. Like, you know, we're shooting this on St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
St. Patrick's Day kicked off, interestingly enough, for whatever reason, several different sieges. One of which is in the book, Never Split the Difference. Tractor Man siege, Washington, D.C., Dwight Watson rolls in to D.C., claims to have 4 bombs and have scattered bombs all over D.C., shuts the city down on St. Patrick's Day. And the most annoying thing about that, when it happened, like, we're trying to leave work early so we can go drinking.
Right, of course.
So we're sitting there like, and plus we always want to siege. Like, we all, you know, that's what we do for a living. So, you know, the media picks up, there's this guy, middle of DC, shutting everything down, claiming to have bombs. This is early in the day, and we're in the office, and we're very torn, because like, you know, we want to leave at noon. We want to go drinking, and then this guy, but it's a siege. We want to do the siege, and I remember we saw images of him on the press just before lunch when we were getting ready to take off, and here he is in Washington D.C. He's flying an American flag upside down, which is a veteran in distress. Yeah. And we see these images and we're like, this is a dude that is crying for help. And he wants to talk. So if somebody shows up that knows what they're doing, this thing should be over in an hour. he's gonna come out as soon as he's had a chance to have his say. And lo and behold, the next morning I'm getting calls like, this guy's still in the middle of the, in the middle of the lawn. This is still going down. And I'm like, all right, I happen to live close by, and I walked over. But the continuum. He tried to protest nonviolently, legally on the center of DC, you know, the malls. He'd had permits to protest several times, several years previously, and nobody cared. So he made the decision to threaten violence in this continuum thing that you're talking about. So the original question is, can you recognize this before they get to that point? And the answer is absolutely. And then maybe even while they're on the verge of it, instead of escalating our tone of voice, matching their aggression, the better way is to turn it down. Which is, unfortunately, the law enforcement training overall hasn't caught up to that yet, in my view. Some of which is because the neuroscience data hasn't been there and it's just speculation. But now that we got neuroscience data, maybe there's additional reason to begin to change the approach. And you don't escalate verbally. Maybe if you turn it down verbally, that is more likely to put them on a different path.
So when you're trying to figure out, you know, like normal people when they're having their interactions.
Wait a minute. What are you implying? I'm abnormal?
There's nothing normal about your skill set. What's interesting? What I mean, normal people in their day to day,
right?
When they're met with aggression,
yes,
a lot of times, if they're not immediately, if the person isn't so overwhelming that they capitulate right away,
right?
On it. That's where I see a lot of the misjudging in there, and they want to match aggression with aggression, and they seem like if they do anything else, it'll be a sign of weakness. And I think they're looking at the situation wrong, because when I see a lot of these acts of violence where people actually, when it came in, when you get the full story of how it happened, you realize there were 2 to 3 situations where it could have been disengaged, really on either side. But the guy that has the distress, who may be initiated, he hasn't been heard. He hasn't.
Right.
There's some perceived grievance that he had with the person, and you just happen to be the person they're taking it out on.
Right.
And stuff. And I see people make tremendous mistakes when they're faced with situations like that. That I think a lot of people don't think there's a way out of this. I don't think that there's a way out of it where they can use their skill sets, not just negotiation, but communication skill sets.
Right.
And I just think it would be. I think if more people read your book and went through your trainings. Not only would they be better, communicators in their own life for less threatening things,
right? But
when it truly is, something that is potentially life or death, they can recognize and not just get into the emotional reaction.
Right. Well, and this is a neuroscience thing that I was alluding to earlier, because now we know there's a neuroscience reason why being met with aggression, you respond with aggression. It triggers the circuitry in your brain. And which then gets angry. Like if I raise my tone of voice to you and you're not trained, there's going to be actual chemical changes in your brain that's going to put you in fight or flight mode. It's not a choice, and it's your default mode. It's a neuroscience reaction. This is hard science. And I know there's some discussion among the neuroscientists whether or not it's mirror neurons. I'm a huge fan of this guy, Andrew Huberman, and I've met him in person, so, I consider him a friend, although, it's not like he lives in the Bay Area. It's not like we can go to lunch every other day. But, we've always, in the Black Swan group, talked about mirror neurons. Like if I say, I need a car in 60 seconds so she dies, I'm going to trigger your mirror neurons, and a physiological response is going to start that you can't stop. With training, you can derail it. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it isn't going to start. And if you're angry with me and use that tone of voice on me, it's going to trigger my mirror neurons. Now, the answer to me, hostage negotiators trained to go into the late night FM DJ voice. But nobody on the street is trained to go into that voice. The people on the street are trained to respond with commands loud enough so everybody can hear them. Right. Which then actually makes the situation worse. But that's their training. So without that training, you don't know how to turn it down. Now, why do I mention Huberman? On his podcast, he was saying when I'm listening to it, he goes, I got news for you. There's no such thing as mirror neurons. Those of you that are talking about mirror neurons, they don't exist. And I'm thinking like, damn it. And they said, however, there is an emotional circuitry that we haven't actually identified yet that does the same thing. And I'm like, okay, I don't care what you call it. You know, you could call it my donkey neurons. I don't care. But the fact of the matter is that happens. And that's why in most cases, without practice preparation, you fall to your highest level of preparation. When somebody comes at you aggressively, you're going to respond in kind. And then the last example of it, which, you know, I'm getting ready to do a study with the FBI actually on verbal responses. We do the 60 seconds or she dies exercise in our negotiation training. You know, we get people to volunteer, and then I go like, I'm the bad guy, you're the good guy. Call me on the phone. And then I say, I need a car in 60 seconds or she dies. Aggressive voice. We're doing this exercise, and one day one of the guys doing it has an Apple Watch on. Now he's sitting as still as you are. And when I punch him in the nose with that voice, he says, my Apple Watch went up to 170 heart rate.
Wow.
So how can you make good decisions like that unless you've been trained?
Yeah, so for the FM voice, it just disengages the person. They probably they're confused probably why they're getting that response. And I've noticed like there are times,
it's part of it,
like little things. Like I talked about one of my friends that ran nightclubs for a long time. One of the biggest things that he did that took care of almost 90% of the violent incidents that they had was he made sure that the bouncers, who were very competent guys, the one thing that he had them do that they weren't doing was every client that came in, they looked them in the eye, shook hands with them, said, hey, I hope you have a great time tonight. That was it. You know, glad to have you here. Hope you have a great time.
Yeah.
It humanized them right away.
What they
found was that when they did have an incident, you know, unless it was just there were those exceptions where that was just going to happen, they put their hand on the guy. He'd look back, and it would be like all of a sudden recognition. Oh, hey, that guy came in at the door.
Yeah.
So there was a de-escalation right away. They didn't have to resort to a lot they used to have to do, which is a lot more hands-on and obviously a lot more liability issues. So it's interesting when, you know, a lot of times people think, oh, well, this is just, you know, psychological mumbo-jumbo or whatever. No, it's how we actually respond to each other. And that to me is really interesting. The more I study this, the violence, you know, in the old days it was all about application, just combatives putting it on. But I'm finding now that the more you understand how to communicate with people, the more you can minimize, you know, violence, or you can at least detract the person who is really just bent on aggression if you can reach them, you know, using some of the techniques that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and your example, I could see where that works because basically you trained him, the touch from that guy was a calming influence. Yeah. And so you're just triggering the same neurosynaptic connections that he triggered earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he goes from the big, you know, because most of them are big guys and aggressive looking guys, and you go from that big aggressive guy and you're imagining whatever the guy's like, and he actually introduces himself to you and says, you must have a good time tonight. Oh, great, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's that little triggers like that. But what I noticed also in your, when I read your book the first time was the assumptions we make sometimes when, especially if you're a leader in any sort of an organization.
Right.
And you start pontificating and just coming out people and making the rest of the same way. And they come back and they keep saying, you're right. You're right. That was one that got me because I
remember that conversation.
I saw myself and I was like, man, that's a, and you don't.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second, and I apologize for this because that was the one thing that blew me away about you when we first met. For somebody to recognize that and then initially say, I got to disconnect because I'm on the wrong track. And I've talked about that a whole bunch of times, like that sort of awareness, especially as a leader, to be able to unplug and go like, all right, the dude just said you're right, which means please shut up. And instead of getting angry, you were like, I gotta go back and reset because I'm on the wrong track.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah, and you do, and you realize also with people close to you, and that happens. And so, like even like if you're having a maybe a friend or a friend of a friend that you don't necessarily like all the time and stuff, and you start to recognize language patterns that you're talking about that could potentially get dangerous later if you don't catch it early on.
Interesting.
And what's interesting is when you employ something, say, now, granted, it works fantastic for negotiations, but business negotiations, but negotiating a life and how you interact with people, if you have the ability to catch yourself, and that's what you really taught me on the original thing. I realized, hey, I didn't have the skill sets to check myself. You gave the reason I wanted to have this is because it applies so much to human interaction and unpleasant antisocial and human interaction,
right,
that if you just start understanding how people communicate and respond and how maybe there's a different tact you can take.
Yeah.
And the way you're working on the less stressful things first to get good at it.
Exactly.
And then you can employ it in the more dire situations. But that was a game changer when I read that. I remember I read that over and over again because I kept thinking of all the times I thought I was so freaking brilliant, and people would just basically tell me, "Shut up, whatever, can't get out of this meeting," And that was really valuable. But I guess what's interesting is, I think it's amazing how you were able to take this from the hostage negotiation standpoint, and then of course bring it into people's regular lives and how they either negotiate business or have interpersonal relationships. But the fact that to me, it's funny because I tell people all the time, if a skill set works very well in a life or death situation, it works even better when things aren't as dire when you're going out, and I think it really applies to what you're talking about. I mean, the stakes that you guys would have at times, especially when you're talking about, the Filipino, situation where people are snatched and it's, high stakes and they want outrageous demands at first, and then the way you're able to actually, just hone it down and not overreact right away. I mean, I think that's interesting because the typical thing for everybody would be like, it's just violence, just go in there and shoot everybody and grab everything.
Right.
And that's not a viable option at times.
Right.
And that's what I thought was interesting. How did you, when you started bringing this into the civilian world, when you started bringing the academic world and then started doing some lectures, what did you learn? What did you see that was like interesting to you, like that wasn't from the law enforcement aspect that you're using, and you started how people utilized your information?
Yeah, well, first of all, I started trying it right away when I was volunteering on a suicide hotline. I'm like, if this works on a hotline, does it work with everybody? And then also making mistakes and learning from the mistakes. And then thinking like, all right, so the methodology is correct, maybe I'm not applying it correctly. From everything from with colleagues to, the now ex-Mrs. Voss.
Yeah.
And then watching other people that weren't hostage negotiators, really, when I was teaching a couple different business schools, like, we made them apply it in their personal life. And then seeing people use it to just get out of some sort of interaction with law enforcement, where law enforcement just try to set you on the right track, but when you interact with law enforcement, you immediately feel threatened, and it feels like an escalation. And people will talk themselves into tickets because they feel threatened. And when the law enforcement dude is just like, hey, look, if I can get across to you that you're on the wrong path, then I'm gonna let you go with a warning.
Yeah.
And then seeing people begin to turn those interactions, where the guy or gal in law enforcement is just like, look, you shouldn't be riding your bike here. For a whole bunch of reasons, it's unsafe. And having one of my students at USC get out of a ticket because she demonstrated that she understood. So, and then people in personal interactions or, husband and wife Christmas tree negotiation, where the wife completely gets her way because when they get into the reasoning, the husband realizes he's completely wrong. So all the stuff across the board like that, it's just been really rewarding.
Yeah, you gave an example. The other thing that, it's going to sound crazy because obviously what I focus on, but the other thing I thought was really interesting was some of the most unpleasant non-life-threatening interactions I've ever had is buying a car. And in your example,
look, I gotta tell you something. It's not fair what you can do in a car negotiation.
Yeah, and could you just kind of share how you did that? I mean, I know a lot of people will get the book, but just that concept was really unique. Meaning, people feel you didn't take any of the bait. You know, like you allowed this guy to put all the normal pressures on you, and the way you're able just to kind of like refocus him, come in, and you know he got acknowledged. But now, after a while, all of a sudden you're dictating what you want.
Yeah, well, you know, and really, you know, I beat him to the punch on everything he wanted to say. You know, it's kind of like understanding what the bait is, and then just going ahead and beating him to the punch. And, you know, telling him, because like, you know, my red Toyota, which I drove over here today, I still have it, salsa red pearl. You know, like I had almost like lusted for a Toyota for the longest time. And they're still, you know, the reliability ratings on them are crazy.
Yeah.
And so, like, I was in love with the color, and I wanted the truck, and there wasn't anywhere to be found. I mean, the guy had every advantage. So instead of him using it against me, you know, I said, you know, I love it. You know, it's worth what you're asking. It's beautiful. Everything that this guy could possibly say, I just went ahead and said it. You know, and then I put it back on him, and I'm like, you know, how am I supposed to pay? And he was, you know, it was just flummoxed, because since I said everything that he would have said, he didn't have anything to say.
Right.
You know, and there's been a couple of videos on the YouTube channel. Every now and then somebody's courageous enough to just go ahead and try this. And then, you know, what really kills them is like, if you look them in the eye and you go like, I'm so embarrassed because that's worth more than what you're asking for. I mean, this is really, I feel like an idiot. This is really embarrassing, but how am I supposed to pay that? And the price just keeps dropping.
Yeah. Because they have to solve your problem now.
Yeah. And since you said everything they were gonna say,
right.
then it leaves them speechless.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bunch of people pointed out to me. They go, "Did you ever see the last scene in 8 Mile when Eminem says everything the other guy was gonna say, and the other guy then didn't say anything?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, not only have I seen it, I used to use it when I was teaching at Georgetown.
Yeah. No, it's a great scene because, you know, people do that. And it's so funny. I have people, you know, when they take shots at you, I'll go to below. I go, seriously, I got 2 ex-wives. That's the best you can do? You know, I've got this, I've got that. You know, and you do that. And what's funny is most people, if you take that approach, it really de-escalates things. I mean, somebody really has to want to, in an aggressive situation, they have to really want it. And now, everybody knows that I am not talking about the criminal predator that's coming on. Those are those black swan events, and yes, you know, you're going to have to probably use violence in that situation. Hopefully, you live a lifestyle that's going to minimize those interactions. What I'm talking about, and the reason I really wanted to have you on, is where I see the vast majority of my clients making big problems is interactions, mainly with people that either have a bad day or they're having a bad day and they're not catching themselves,
right.
And they don't realize, you know, the ability to recognize when a communication is getting out of control is absolutely invaluable, and it can save you from having to deal with you know, either in the legal system, being injured, or just something that could have been avoidable if you have the skill sets. And I don't think people put enough time into learning how to communicate with other humans, or recognizing how humans communicate and understanding, oh, I know what this guy's doing, and I'm not gonna respond in kind, I'm gonna respond this way, and do that. I think you do a tremendous service for people that way.
Yeah, and you know, you're talking about how to keep both of you from going into a downward spiral.
Yes. And
then, to some degree, it's a little bit of a diagnostic. You know, are they having a bad day, or are they a predator? You know, if you use a verbal de-escalation technique, and it doesn't calm them down, you just immediately confirm that you're faced with a predator.
Right.
So that's, while it's bad news, it's news,
right.
Which makes you smarter. And so, you know, and the more common thing is a mutual downward spiral. And how do you throw that out there early on to try to figure out which one you're dealing with? Because then I'm completely in agreement with you. when violence is the answer, it's the answer.
Yeah.
You don't go there first. You got to know for sure that you're on the right track. And verbal de-escalation, such as late night FM DJ voice, in anything that you say, is immediately going to give you feedback as to what you're faced with.
Yeah, because I've outlined in a couple of videos situations where you had two normal guys, basically. One is this one that just kills me. A hockey coach, girl hockey coach. A male hockey coach who trained a girls team in Minnesota. Just by all accounts, just the greatest guy. He's at like a kind of a bar pub having dinner with some of his friends. Not like a crazy, not a bar that had any issues. It wasn't like a violent place to go or anything. During COVID, so he goes in to go to the bathroom, and some of the urinals were covered, for social distancing. Some guy comes in, he's definitely been drinking, pissed off, and he just makes a big show of ripping off, the plastic on one of the urinals and using it, and just, giving his opinion about what's going on. It was pretty graphic, and it really offended this guy.
Yeah.
And he didn't say anything then, and this guy goes on. They didn't have any words then. Sat and went back to his table. This guy's going to leave, loud, boisterous, going to leave, and that's when he could not say something. And so he says something. They get into it a little bit, verbally. They take it outside. It keeps going. It keeps it keeps spiraling down, and then what happens? The guy who ripped the plastic off takes one step in, hits him. This guy loses his balance, goes down a flight of steps, and dead. And so you got two guys. You got one guy dead, hockey coach, ought to live for. Another guy who was pretty much a normal guy. He wasn't a normally violent guy, but they got themselves there. Now he's facing minimum manslaughter.
Now his life as he knew it is over.
Yeah, and nobody recognized that. Those to me are where these skill sets are so essential. And I've been able to give so many people. Not that I was that way too much, but after reading your book and going through, watching your master class and stuff like that, you are able to see a situation that could easily spiral down, that you could participate in, and just choose not to participate. Recognizing, hey, yeah, this is obnoxious, but he wants somebody to engage. He's looking for that. He's looking for somebody to give him a reason, to vent whatever he's doing, and I'm not going to be that reason. I'm going to be there. Or if I do have an interaction with him, hey man, looks like you're having a bad day, or something like that. Just something where you acknowledge that, hey, something's up. I don't know what's up. And like you said, if that doesn't help, now you're dealing with a predator. Now you're dealing with somebody who really is dangerous. But I can't tell you the number of stories of people that did not have the skill sets that you teach, who are good people, who ended up having horrible results, and life-changing results.
Well, if I may, I'll give you two examples, because all right, so maybe the people that are watching this are like, so if I see it start to go down, or if I'm in the middle of it, but let's say you're the third-party bystander, how do you jump in? So the reason why nobody knows how to do it is because mostly the world is filled with bad examples, mostly in the media, TV and movies. They tell you how to do it wrong, like this common ground. Hey, dude, I felt like you, this whole feel, felt, found. I feel the way you do, I felt the way you do, and this is what I tried, and this is what I found. That's really bad. And every now and then I experiment with this. So, bad example, which in the movies would go well. Stranded in LA, with a plane load of people stranded in LA, who 2 days ago, we had no intention of being in LA at all. Because of COVID, the airlines are having trouble staffing. I'm coming out of DC. I get a change in my connection to get back to Vegas is going to go through Los Angeles. And I'm thinking like, okay, didn't plan on being in LA at all, but it's just a connection, no big deal. Plane gets ready to take off. We take off an hour late, so I already know I'm going to miss my flight and I'm going to get stranded in LA, which happens to everybody else headed for Vegas at the same time. By the time we show up in LA, this is a plane load of unhappy people. Get up in a line, we're trying to get fixed, we are stranded overnight, within driving distance of home. But nobody's going to make that drive And so we're in line at the customer fix my problem counter. Happened to be a little Asian female behind, and the guy is just like hammering her. I mean, he is upset. I got to get back to my house tonight. You want me to stay overnight when I could drive back before you fly me back? Nobody's taking care of he can't get back in time to take care of his dog. I mean, the dude is downward spiral. So I'm like, all right, I haven't tried this common ground nonsense in a while. Let me try. And I say, hey man, none of us planned being here in Los Angeles tonight. We are all in the same boat. We are all going through the same thing. It's not her fault. And he turns around and looks at me and says, shut the fuck up, mind your own fucking business. And his common ground thing makes him so angry that when he goes back and starts hammering her again, he stops to turn around and tell me to fuck off again. Common ground, I don't give a fuck what your common ground is. How dare you? Now, the flip side. I'm getting on a train in Jersey a couple years ago, PATH train into Manhattan, Saturday morning, rainy, tough day. And I see this black female come in and sit down. And she looks like an honest, working class, blue collar, my kind of person. I consider myself blue collar. She looks like she's having a tough day. She sits down and she elbows her way into black dude sitting next to her, same look, solid working class guy. And she sits down and she elbows him and she says, I said, excuse me, move over. And she is sitting there and she's continuing to elbow this dude. And I'm watching this guy going into a downward spiral, and I'm thinking like, there is no way this works out well for him. He's gonna at least push her, and there's never any excuse for a man to raise his hand to a woman, no matter how much she provoked him. And I do not want to see this guy go down the tubes. I'm on the other side of the train. And so I walk across the train, and I say, I'm sorry, which always catches people off guard because they wonder what you're sorry about. And I hold out my hand and I go, I'm Chris. And he looks at me and he goes, Chris, I'm not trying to meet you, Chris. And I'm like, look, man, I just don't want to see anything bad happen to you. And I go back to the other side of the car and I mind my own business. Now I'm watching him, the wheels are turning now. And you can see him thinking like, this is stupid. She's in the wrong, but it doesn't matter. She might be having a bad day herself. I'm just not going to get into a confrontation with this girl. And he gets up and he crosses the train. And it's over. Yeah. Now, you ain't never going to see that in a Hollywood movie.
No.
But that's why nobody knows how to do that. Because nobody ever gets to see it go down.
That's really interesting. So all you did was you just get that guy out of his head where he had to deal with you, basically, and do something that didn't make sense to him probably at the time. But that was enough to stop what he was doing and to recognize, oh, now I can think about it. Hey, wait a minute, this is stupid. What am I about to get myself into?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it was a thought pattern interrupt. It's similar to the bouncer thing that you were talking about earlier. A little bit of personalization, but I didn't ask him his name. Right. Most people say, hey, what's your name? No, I ain't doing that. Yeah. Especially, because a person's name can be a closely held commodity. It's the one thing that we have to reteach salespeople about, and it's the Dale Carnegie method. Your name is the most important. You love hearing it. It's your favorite word. Well, until it's being coerced out of you and it's being used against you. And people are often very cautious of their name. So, I didn't ask him his name. I'm Chris. And so, this dude on the other side of the car, who's nobody, Buninsky, the way I was at the airport in LA, right. I never introduced myself to that guy. Right. But now all of a sudden, this isn't some bozo on the other side of the car, it's some dude named Chris, who for whatever reason doesn't want to see anything bad happen to me. And it's just enough of a positive thought pattern interrupt that, I just remember, I'm Chris, I've used to intervene a lot. He was the only guy that ever went, Chris, I'm not trying to meet you, Chris. Then, of course, he's using my name, so he knows my name. Yeah. And then I'm like, cool, cool. You know, he didn't tell me to F off like the guy in the airport did, because I didn't go with this common ground nonsense. Right. I connected.
Why do you think people? Why do you think people feel the common ground is they think somehow that was it something that has been sold for years to people, that's in there? Because it does seem very logical. Right. Like, oh, if I can just get you to realize that we're all here. I mean, I tell people all the time, in violence we live, like I said, we all get to live up here. We got great lives. We got a lot more to lose than the guy down here that's the predator that's coming in. And the mistake that people make in violence, it's funny, I didn't think about this till then. We always tell people, listen, you're not going to be able to drag him up here and say, hey, look, he doesn't have to be this way. See, there's this great life. You got to get down to his level, deal with him here, so you get to go back to your thing. You have to recognize that it's not there. I mean, it's not as clean cut as what you were talking about. But yeah, how can you explain to people that? Because I think that's an important thing to understand, because a lot of times we have this illusion that you can just see what this looks like, what it does, but people in that mode can't hear that.
Right. All right. So it's kind of two things you threw out there, like first was common ground, what's wrong with it, and secondly, why can't people in that mode hear that?
Right.
So Sean Acker, Harvard psychologist, did a TED Talk, which I think is called The Happiness Advantage. He says you're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. So by definition, when you're in a negative frame of mind, you're dumber. Right. That's unavoidable. If you're smarter in a positive mindset, you have to be dumber in a negative mindset. Right. So that's one of the reasons why someone in a negative mindset can't see, because their brain is actually functioning less effectively. Plus, I think the double whammy of a negative mindset is you're even more convinced you're right when you're angry. So now, not only you're dumber, but you're more convinced that you're smarter. It's a double whammy. And that's why you can't, they physically, neurologically don't have the ability to come up to a higher level thinking, because they're actually being constrained in their thinking by neurochemicals. They actually can't think as well. And so that's why you got to take a different route to get them up there. Now, what's the problem with common ground? I think theoretically, the common ground idea is, since we share common ground, you should understand. Which in most cases, that's really problematic. In my experience, the two strongest aspects of common ground are ethnicity or geography, actually in reverse order, geography then ethnicity. Like, I don't care what ethnicity you are. If we grew up in the same small town in Iowa, we're going to resonate with each other. Right. Geography first. You go get, I'm Irish-German mix. You go get an Irish-German guy who grew up in Mississippi, he ain't going to be like me. Right. So it's geography first. But then ideally, then we understand. But the whole empathy idea is, instead of guessing, making the other side guess whether or not I understand, I'll just go ahead and tell you what I think you're thinking. And then either I do understand, which now you resonate, or here's the crazy thing about it, you feel it's collaborative to begin with, and you'll correct me. And correction, by definition, is collaboration. The person correcting you is actually trying to help you. Now, people hate to get corrected, but actually when someone corrects you, they're stepping to your side, which most people miss. Right. So, look, let me see if I understand where you're coming from, and I'll throw it out. First of all, you're going to want to see if I get it right. You're going to like what I get right. And then, since I tried, you're probably going to be willing to correct me, and as soon as you correct me, we're no longer on opposite sides of the table. We're on the same side. And so that's, with the common ground, it just, because you're hoping I understand. But hope is not a strategy.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I think is really key that most people don't understand is allowing, you kind of touched on it tangentially, but the idea of allowing people in a conversation, especially if it's an initial conversation or you're trying to get rapport, allowing them to say no. giving them, and in fact, giving them the opportunity to say no. And what that does, obviously it's huge in your book and you cover it, but could you just explain the general concept of that to people?
Yeah, and that's another one that a lot of people have a real problem with, because they look at yes as success, and if yes is success, then by definition no is failure. Yeah. And people just get on the wrong track entirely. So the first problem with yes is all the hustlers and all the snakes, bamboozle us into deals by getting us to say yes. Now everybody, I don't know any human being that hasn't been stung by that at some point in time, usually in their late teens, early 20s, somewhere along the lines. They didn't know what it was, but would you like to get a discount on everything you buy? Like somewhere in my boxes of storage, I still have this coupon book that I bought for $25, I think when I was 22 years old. They were supposed to give me $5,000 of discounts, and I could never figure out how to use any of it. But I'm sure I said yes to a whole bunch of things. The next thing I know, I was out of $25, and I had this coupon book that was had no use. Like you get 50% discount a Tuesday night at midnight if you walk in on one foot. Like something you could never do. Yeah. Everybody's been stung by that. So then you have a memory, you're yes battered. Somebody starts to try to get you to say yes, it triggers that negative reaction. It's like a battered child. Now, it's physically good, neurologically healing for one person to hug another person. The embrace, the raising kids, all that proves it time after time. However, you try to hug a battered child, even though you're a good person, they're still going to flinch. They're battered every time an arm raises to them. So you might not be a yes batterer, but if you engage in behavior that the yes batterer did, they're automatically going to recoil. Right. And when we started looking for it, we see it everywhere. Like there isn't a human being that I've ever asked, when I said, how do you feel when a voice on the other end of the phone says, have you got a few minutes to talk? Like everybody always says, they may not say no right away, but it triggers anxiety in everybody. Yeah. Well, if yes was a great thing to say, everybody would automatically go, yes, and be delighted by the experience.
Right, not feel trapped.
Yes, but it's a trap. It's always a trap. So then the crazy thing about it, and we discovered this really by accident than by application, like as much anxiety somebody feels from saying yes, they feel as much or more safety by saying no. And then the stupidity of it is, it's almost like Pavlov's dog. Since they automatically feel safe when they say no, all you do is change your questions. From do you agree to do you disagree? So, and with every single question, like the Black Swan Group, the Black Swan Method, we are out of the yes business entirely. Talking to a bunch of very high-level investment banking people just a couple of days ago in New York. They're like, oh my God, what? We live on yes. We can't do that. And then they start making up stuff in their head. Well, getting them to say, no, that's disrespectful, because they've got this nonsense in their head. Right. But we were doing a training a couple years ago, hospital company. They're trying to get a head nurse in a hospital to accept a program that they have that they know is going to be good for patients. And so one of the executives decides she's going to try this. She's going to test this on the no stuff. And she literally gets up and walks out of the room, and she sends the head nurse a text message, are you against implementing this program? And previously, would you like to, would you agree, do you want to? And it had gotten either silence, complete silence, or disagreement for weeks. Weeks. Are you against implementing the program? Immediately shoots back, no. They cut the deal, they straighten it out. She walks back in the room and she goes, you guys are not going to believe what just happened.
Wow.
Just, it's that instantaneous.
One of the things personally that skill set I got from you, which I'm still amazed at, is if you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, and you're about to say something that definitely is not going to make the other person happy, or it's going to be difficult for them to hear. The way you front load, you taught us to front load with hey, listen, you're not going to like what I'm about to say.
Right.
You overdo it. You're probably going to think I'm a horrible person for this.
Right.
I'm just going to sound really selfish, or
right.
you front load with all that stuff, and then you deliver the actual statement that you wanted to say, and the person's already. I mean, the effect that has on people, I can't believe how well it works.
Yeah.
I mean, you can actually have a difficult conversation without it getting out of control.
Yeah.
You know,
yep.
and that to me has been a really just a great communication technique with people. You know, when I have to deliver something, if I have to tell somebody, hey, I'm not really happy with your performance or whatever, but the way I front, you know, I put it together, or even in interpersonal relationships, I used to, you know, my wife and I, you know, I'll do it if I sit there and go, hey, you're probably going to think, you know, I'm not wanting to do this or whatever, and then they hear what you're actually saying. It's really interesting how you can do that with people. You can have instead of avoiding difficult conversations, you can have difficult conversations.
Right. Yep.
But also acknowledge to the person, hey, you know, you're probably not going to like what I'm about to say, and it's okay that you don't like what I'm about to say. I understand that you're not going to like this, or I understand if I come off like this. But the idea of front loading that before you deliver whatever you're about to say is really, I'd never heard that before, and I can't believe how it's just such a basic, you know, simple technique to do.
Yeah.
It's just I rarely see people actually doing it.
Yeah, again, because you get no examples of it out there.
No.
The vast majority of the advice is, you know, do the positive, negative, positive. You know, sandwich the negative with two positives.
Right.
That's actually bad advice. To start out, because hey, I love you, Tim. You know, you've been a great employee, and then you turn around and tell them why they're a bad employee,
right.
And they feel sideswiped. Or whatever the circumstances are. And then the ridiculously wrong-headed emphasis on the idea that if you make a great first impression, everything else will take care of itself, which is not the case. So there's so much bad advice out there, which actually to some degree I'm glad it continues to be put out there, because that means that everybody that reads the Black's Never Split the Difference or learns the Black Swan method is always going to have the competitive advantage.
Yeah. Oh no, that's. I don't think you'll ever run out of customers. I mean, that's just it, because it's proliferation out there, and I can't believe it. It's so funny. After going through your book, I pulled out some of my old negotiation books that I had from yours, you know, and I just laugh. I laugh at it, you know, not because they're, you know, I understand where they're coming from. But I remember trying to employ some of that stuff, and it just never worked. You know, and I was just like, I go, I must be a shitty negotiator, you know. And what was interesting was using your stuff. And if you haven't experienced it, the great thing about Chris's stuff is you can apply it right away, and you can try it out at low level, you know, things, you know, low risk thing. You can try it out at a restaurant, you know, you can try it out on people, and like that woman did.
Try it out with your spouse.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Your kids, I can't believe, like when I catch myself and I prep myself with my kids, it actually does work. But of course, I still let my little emotional triggers get me sometimes. Those little turds get
Your
me.
Kids trigger you? I'm shocked.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's my negotiation, you know, war right there. And my little guy is a good negotiator.
I'll bet he is.
He always goes one step more with us. He's awesome at it. You know, my wife and I laugh at it all the time. And
he's got two smart people to learn from.
Yeah, I wish. Where do you see communication going now in the age of social media, and having, you know, us? I'm seeing a lot of really uncomfortable interactions happening now that COVID is opened up, and people, the effects of people being kind of isolated for 2 years almost, and now re-entering into social situations. I'm seeing these skills even more valuable right now, because I'm seeing things that I never saw before. And of course, social media itself is just a cesspool of you know, aggression a lot of times.
Right.
And do you go into that with any of your work at all? on how people negotiate those areas?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're evolving and we're applying our negotiation skills in our social media. And when we get those questions in the training all the time, how do we drop it into social media? All the stuff we're talking about applies. And sort of the age of social media, I think we're getting ready to do a little bit of a shift here too, because we're becoming more aware of how bad it could be and how we could get locked into downward spirals, and then the amount of nefarious players out there that are trying to influence us and use it against us, for whatever reasons. I mean, the Russians are out there. Yeah. They are influencing social media. And then there's also another generational shift that's getting ready to come. Because I think a lot of today's social media is catered to, quote, the millennials, if you will. And by the way, just to comment on the millennials, I see the top performers in all generations being the same. They're smart, ambitious, curious, and they want to learn. And the top performers, whether it be millennials or baby boomers, are the same animal. So when I talk about the millennials, I'm really talking about to the middle of the bell curve, which their big problem is they haven't been stressed enough and they react negatively to stress. So what I'm starting to read now about Gen Z, Gen Z, they got a lot of their experience during the recession, 2007, 2008. So they're a little tougher and they're not as rattled by stress. And so they get a look at who's ahead of them, and they very much like the emphasis on making the world a better place and employment that meets larger social goals. So they like that, and I think what I'm reading is they're very focused on that. But they've been through some tough times already, which makes them by definition a little tougher. So I think there's going to be a shift in social media. It's going to get away from who can be the biggest victim.
Right.
Woe is me. Yeah. To, all right, let's figure this out and let's get smart and let's actually make positive things happen. And I'm sure I veered off from your question some, but we apply the same ideas in social media, in all of our social media interactions.
Yeah, your social media is really, what's good about your social media is you give great information, like actionable information right away, which is cool. I mean, so many people try to just do teasers, and you're actually, giving information that, people, because when I point people to, hey, you gotta get this book, and they go, well, what is it? I go, look, check this out, and I'll send one of your pieces, and they get it right away, because it's so counter to everything else you're hearing. I mean, just the idea of why you would want somebody to give somebody the option to say no, why you would want to front load a difficult conversation with acknowledging that it's probably going to not come off great to the other person, and that you're probably going to look like a jerk or sound like a jerk, but that's not what I really mean.
And if I could throw in, one of the reasons why our emphasis has always been on actionable, like I'm sure you've had, because you've trained a lot of cops.
Yeah.
Like as an FBI agent training cops, if you don't give them useful information, I like to say it's like playing the Apollo. You're going to get booed off the stage, and they're probably going to throw stuff at you if you're not any good.
Oh yeah.
So training cops, I always love that. It's a tough crowd. You better bring an A game with usable stuff, or you ain't going to last.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool. It's so cool to see. I've seen you at the highest levels, obviously with the business titans and everybody that you're dealing with. I've seen you, your speaking gigs and stuff. And then, but to see you, locally here when you were working with some of the negotiators and just their response to you, you can get right back down in it. You can get right into the trenches again with those guys, and they all come away with just like, wow. I mean, they were all talking about it, and they're a fairly experienced group, and they got a lot out of just coming in, which is unique because you see a lot of guys that they can't go back to the roots. They can't go back right away. They've been up here too long, dealing with other crowds, and you're extremely comfortable with those guys, and you enjoyed it too. I mean,
I did, yeah.
No, I really appreciate that. Well, listen, I think I appreciate your time. I think we covered a lot of great ground today. Everybody will have all the contact information. Is there anything in particular coming up that you'd like people to be aware of, or a particular place you'd like to send them? It'll all be covered in the show notes, but I want to make sure that you...
Well, we're getting ready to get out, and we're starting to get out in person again. We just did 2 days in LA. We got something coming up in New York, 2 days. But everybody that's out there, I mean, access the free stuff first. We got a lot of free stuff on the website. Get yourself up to speed, because when you come to a 2-day or 1-day, you got to be ready.
Yeah.
We don't want you to miss stuff because you didn't have the basics. So we got a lot of ways to get the basics in real simple ways.
No, that's awesome. And if you have not, I preach a lot about understanding human nature, how important it is for your self-protection. I'm telling you, if you want to fast track it, you need to get Chris's material. And if any of you have his masterclass, you know what I'm talking about. He's the #1 guy on masterclass right now, and rightfully so. Just really great information. But there's so many other ways. If you can train with him live with the Black Swan Group, that's gold standard. But Chris, hey man, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it, brother.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Chris is just an amazing communicator. His book, Never Split the Difference, I cannot highly recommend it enough. It is outstanding. It's fun to read. And he's just a great individual. If you get a chance to get on Masterclass and watch one of his modules, it's just absolutely outstanding. It'll make you a better communicator. And it also make you a safer person, because again, you won't fall for some of the triggers in antisocial exchanges. There's ways you can disengage people. Chris gives you tremendous techniques that'll just really improve your life and also give you better self-protection. So I hope you enjoyed the interview today as much as I enjoy it. Love hanging out with him, and I look forward to seeing him in the very near future. Let me know your questions, and I'll make sure that Chris gets some. Now, listen, again, go ahead and get your masterclass at timlarkin.com. Absolutely free. Just give us your email. Start putting your self-protection plan together. And also, please, 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 subscribe to the channel. Get your friends to check it out. Please share these videos. Like I said, it's getting harder and harder to get to our audience. And you guys have been a huge help. So I very much appreciate that. So until next time, stay safe.